Good morning, and thank you for joining us for our webinar on commissioning do's and don'ts. Before we begin, if it seems like you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please notify me by typing your question at any point during the webinar into the question section of your control panel on the right side of your screen. I'm going to wait a second just to make sure everyone seems good. Nothing's coming in, so off to a great start. We will have a Q&A session following the presentation. You are more than welcome to submit questions at any point during the webinar, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible after the presentation. There will also be a brief survey that will pop up in a new window immediately following the webinar. If you wouldn't mind taking a couple minutes to complete that, we'll be able to send you a copy of the presentation afterwards. If there are no further questions, looks like there are not, we're good. I'd like to introduce AEE's very own Josh Brister, as well as two special guests. Without further ado, Josh, I will pass the baton over to you.
Excellent, thank you, Erin. Good morning, and I guess possibly good afternoon to everybody out there. Thanks for joining us on a nice Friday here in the dog days of summer. As Erin alluded to, I've got two special friends of the program here. Danny Heidowitz, who is application engineering and training at Enphase Energy, and Andrew Wickham, who's in charge of product marketing at Snap and Rack. And we're here to talk about commissioning best practices, what to do, what not to do, and maybe some helpful tricks and best practices on how to achieve better results. So welcome, guys.
Hey, Josh, good morning. Thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Josh. Glad to be here.
So you guys are not new to the program, but as you probably remember, we like to kick off with an agenda and just kind of outline what we'll cover in today's session. So we'll talk about, briefly the importance of good commissioning practices, why commissioning is one of the most critical steps in the overall process. Won't spend too much time there because hopefully that's obvious. We'll spend the bulk of our time here talking about what can be done on install day. Prior to that, what can be done to achieve better results and better outcomes in commissioning. So we've broken this up into kind of two sections and spend a little bit of time on each, talking about offsite prep. So what kind of things can you do back at the warehouse or before install day to have good outcomes at commissioning? And then what can you do on site at the job site to, again, lead to good outcomes? And while we're going through this, hopefully we'll have a little fun, and we won't be too technically heavy here. We're gonna be really practical and just try to share some best practices that the two subject matter experts have picked up along the way. And then of course, some times for question and answer. So make sure you use that chat function, send us anything that's on your mind, and we'll cover it in due time. So that said, let's get kicked off here. Why is commissioning such an important step? Well, frankly, it's the last chance to get it right before your guys leave. And it's because it is that last step before inspection and before PTO, it's critical in the installation process, and it's kind of one of those monopoly steps. If you don't do it right, you don't pass go, you don't collect $200. Similarly, rushed or poorly performed commissioning can lead to some really bad outcomes: service calls, additional truck rolls, delayed PTO, and as we know, if you don't get PTO, most of the time you don't get paid. So really critical there. Other things, for those of you guys that do service work or get called out on follow-ups or service calls, you can tell the jobs that were rushed or the jobs that were not commissioned properly. It's usually pretty apparent once you take a look up there. Similarly, poor aesthetics. I think in our industry, it's a very visible kind of service we perform, and sloppy jobs don't get referrals. And I think most of us count on referrals to grow our sales base. And then finally,
Following up on that, Josh, delayed PTO, failed inspections, people not saving money on their bill right away, that all leads to low customer satisfaction too, and they're not going to be referring you to that next job.
Oh, definitely not. I mean, we hear this from dealers, and we see it. We see it in things like social media groups and comments. Is that one of the biggest drivers for customer satisfaction is the time between install day and PTO, and everything you can do to decrease that time. Well, one, it's money in your pocket because you're getting paid more quickly, but two, higher customer satisfaction. Absolutely. And then finally, unproductive install teams. If you've got bad commissioning processes and you're waiting on things like firmware or software updates with a 4-man crew and 3 of them are standing around waiting on the electrical guy, that may be great for them, but a lot of you guys get paid on piecework, so that's unproductive. And if they're paid hourly, hey, there's probably other work they could be doing. They could be prepping the next day's job. They could be off the clock. So a lot of bad outcomes flow from poor commissioning. Now there's some data I like to present here on these kind of topics, and it's data I've shown before. This is from NYSERDA, who's the utility commission in New York State. And they've got a really handy guide here that I've linked to that talks about inspection failures, kind of the failure modes that they see, and maybe what installers can do to mitigate some of those failures. And they break down here the most common buckets for inspection failures. And it may seem a little ticky-tack, but the most likely failures are really simple. It's things like labeling, proper grounding, conduit fittings. And every time I see this and I think about it, it just drives home the need for a good quality program. And I ask myself, geez, if I were a foreman, how silly would I be that homeowner, the system fails inspection, homeowner has delayed PTO because I didn't have the right labels, or I missed wire clips and I've got conductors touching the roof. Just silly things that I think can be easily prevented, and that's exactly what we wanted to cover here. Andrew, you've got some great slides here on some of these things around wire management and some simple things that installers can do to have better outcomes and pass more successfully.
Yeah, so one of the big things with good commissioning, both on the inspection side of things and then on the longevity of the system and service calls, is managing your wires and cables. I mean, essentially, if you look at especially a composition roof, it's essentially sandpaper up there that wires and cables can scratch along. It's super abrasive, and eventually that insulation stuff wears out. You can have shorts, all sorts of things. So you've also got the sharp edges of your racking system. No matter what manufacturer of rail or railless racking, they all have sharp 90-degree angle edges that wires can run across and easily rub and get pretty torn up. So, that's going to end up with low customer satisfaction from the fact that all of a sudden now their system's not working because one of the wires got cut and the system shuts down, or you're going to have service calls, and it happens pretty quick within a couple years, sometimes within days. So the other big thing is it's going to fail inspections when you have a good inspector that actually gets on the roof and looks at what's going on, or even in some of these images that are pretty bad, looks up under the array. So it's really crucial to make sure, whether you're using the module frame or if you're using a rail system for racking, you have a place that you can actually effectively tuck away modules, and they're going to stay there for the tuck away cables and wires, and they're going to stay there for the life of the system.
Absolutely.
Yeah, back in my day, I used to have a pretty strict policy that there should be basically no wires visible under the racking. So
yeah.
Admittedly, that's a little tougher with railless, but it's just a good strict policy.
yeah, if you can't see it, it's
Yeah, and I mean, to that point, Danny, it's not this, Josh, on this slide, it's also the materials you're using. I mean, you could zip tie anything up, but most people don't know this. Zip ties have about a shelf life of 7 years, so they're going to deteriorate being up there on the roof. So it's important to use materials, that are metal, whether it's using your clips or, utilizing rails, et cetera, to make sure when you have events, whether it's snow, wind, ice, or critters getting up there underneath, it's not a material that's going to be torn away.
I used to always really like those snap and rack clips too, the polycarbonate ones. Those are nice.
Thank you.
And that is the reason that if you guys have ever had a system quote from Glenn or Brad or the other guys, we always specify wire clips with the project because it's cheap insurance for exactly this reason.
Yeah, you don't want this to be one of the systems you installed.
Yep. So another really bad outcome here is this beauty, Andrew.
Yeah, aesthetics, definitely a big part of customer satisfaction. It's not just once you get on the roof. Obviously, there are things here, with rails sticking out at different lengths, not being cut flush, and having a pretty funky setup for where the modules are. But because of that, you got to think, from the period of designing your system, you want to put together a system that's going to be cohesive and flow with the existing roof so that when customers look up at it, they're proud of it, and their neighbors, going back to the referrals, look up and say, wow, I always thought solar looked ugly. That looks really nice. I think maybe I'm up for getting solar. You see it happen all the time because even though solar has been around a while, it's a relatively new industry, and I'm sure everyone here has heard the people that say, oh yeah, I don't want to do it because I think it looks ugly. Well, this image does look ugly. Later on, we've got some better images that show really, really pretty systems that will make people be like, oh, wow, maybe I will get solar now that I see it looks so nice. So very important.
Yeah.
That's so bad. I like to at least imagine that they're planning to come back next week and finish.
I hope so. I mean, I've seen conduit, I've seen flex. I don't know that I've ever seen wire run in garden hose before.
Wow.
Okay. Well, boy, that's a hard slide to follow. So, I mean, we've talked a little bit about the what not to do, and it's fun to show those images. I think it's more important for our purposes here to talk about what we actually can do about it, and kind of two buckets that we're gonna dig a little deeper into. We'll talk through again the offsite work, and this is the practical part that is not very heralded. It's not a lot of fun to talk about training documents and prep work, but it's critical in my opinion to good outcomes. And then we'll talk through some more practical things on site, good practices and habits to get into, installation checklists. We always recommend those. And then in terms of actually commissioning an inverter system, what are some things that will help speed that process and make sure that that goes as smoothly as possible. So we will jump right in. So offsite, mentioned this before. It's not terribly exciting to talk about training programs and checklists and things, but it's really hard to get the install and the commissioning right if you're not really tight on these two steps. And I tend to kind of break this down into right material and right tools. So the time to make sure you got the right material for the job is not when you get to the job, and hopefully that's obvious. Making sure you got the right material is it's kind of one of those everyday things. And it breaks down into the kitted material that you're going to have for that job, which I've heard people refer to as kitted or discrete material. That's all the big ticket stuff that's going to be called out on a plan set. That also refers to mechanical tools. Danny, I've seen some slides from you in the past where it was apparent that someone had didn't have the right socket or the right attachment and just kind of mangled the screw into place. Yes. There's no excuse for that. Like, we're all professionals, right? Like, if you don't have the right tools, you're not going to do good work. That applies to camping, to cooking, to install work, to you name it. One other call out I want to make here is parachute bags, and we'll cover that in a couple of slides. That's that's a really handy takeaway for making sure you've got the right what we call free stock material for the job. And again, we'll cover that in a few minutes. Tools are critical to our success, and obviously we're talking about things like impacts and drivers, but and saw blades, etc. But think about tools a little bit more broadly. The tools and the information that your crew is going to take with them. Design detail. Are your plan sets thorough enough that nothing is left to interpretation or question at the job site? Think upstream from there. Site audits. Has someone physically seen this property before you guys show up? Are there going to be surprises that we were talking about one the other day? Install in the North Bay area, and nobody knew, it wasn't marked on the plan set, that the service entrance was 60 feet away on a pole, and there was really going to be no way to do rapid shutdown initiation from the meter socket. Things like that, it's easy to nitpick those corner cases, but without a good site audit plan and a way of marking the plan set accordingly, you're going to miss that stuff, and you're going to have some really unpleasant experiences. Things like having your the right firmware downloaded and available to your teams. And with product like Enphase and SolarEdge, there's usually one rev at a time. But if you're installing off-grid product, Schneider, Outback, etc., you may need a couple different firmware revs depending upon what you're trying to do and what the application is. Good practices and habits, that that sounds terribly obvious, but that goes back to the training program, that you've got the right rhythms and cadences pre-work, during the work, and after the work to lead to good outcomes. Training materials, that kind of encapsulates everything we're talking about here. That it's great if the foreman or the kind of operations head understands all this and knows the right way to do it, but if you're not if you're not incorporating that for every new guy off the street, you're going to have a really steep learning curve for that guy. Software tools, I mentioned, firmware earlier, but there's going to be other things that, your install teams might need. Some of the more complicated equipment we sell, you might need a config tool or, software analyzer to make sure that things get commissioned properly. And then the ultimate thing on the list here is installation checklists. So that's something I recommend for any installer out there. We've got some examples we can make available to you guys, but I think it's a good exercise for your operations teams to go through to compare a couple examples and figure out what the right checklist is for your crews, depending upon your areas, your processes, what kind of AHJ and inspection criteria you're operating against. The process of building the checklist is sometimes as important as working through the checklist itself.
And so Josh, just maybe a cool thing to mention, Enphase is actually adding some like range and wireless distance testing capabilities to the software too. So it's kind of neat.
Oh, that is neat.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's one of those, that's one of those theory versus practice things that a lot of these systems, like in theory, you've got enough range and you don't have to worry about, communication, but in practice you might. So that's great to hear. Right material. So I mentioned the call out to parachute bags and truck stock. I believe truck stock's a commonly used term, but basically what we mean is material that stays on the truck and is stocked in a regular fashion, and is not necessarily called out on the plan set or the bill of materials.
And following up on the truck stock, Josh, you talked before about having the right material for the job, having more than enough. This especially applies to racking, but even having an extra microinverter, et cetera. The truth is, if you're installing solar every day, you're going to use the material eventually. So having about 10% over the material you need for a job, this includes cables, wires, everything you need is always good practice, because you definitely don't want to have to run out and run back to the warehouse or to the hardware store.
Right.
Exactly. And Danny, I'm thinking about a webinar that you and I did a few years ago, and we showed kind of the Hall of Shame, and you know, a number of those pictures were just simple things like, you know, the guys ran out of end clamps and they
Oh
tried
yeah.
they
Mid
tried to use
clamps
a
as an
mid
end
clamp.
clamp, right? Yeah. Ouch.
Like, you know, it's a $2 part, guys. Like, have some extra, you know. So I called out parachute bags, and this is a program that we've seen employed a couple different places. For the keen-eyed viewers here, you may notice that these bags have different colored handles. That there's actually tape that's been wrapped around the handles. You know, some of these are pink. You got a green one, a red one, a brown one. So for each one of these, there's a stocking plan, and each color refers to a different type of material. So one of these is 3/4 inch conduit fittings. One of them is 1-inch conduit fittings. One of them is you know, miscellaneous mechanical hardware like lags and bolts. You know, but basically you've got a series of bags here that are going to be stocked the same way regardless of which truck they're assigned to. And the practice here is, you know, you've got a stocking plan for each of these. You've got a spot in your warehouse where the bags get dropped off when they need replenishment. They get filled up, you know, overnight or early in the morning by the warehouse crew. And before the truck leaves in the morning, you make sure that you've got full parachute bags with all of your, you know, your free stock mechanical and electrical hardware. It's an unfair task to, you know, make the install crew be responsible for everything that goes into that bag every morning. A great kind of separation of duties is to make sure that they're responsible for getting their bags replenished, and that the warehouse crew stocks the same bags the same way. So between the parachute bags and the truck stock, what I like to think about is that, you know, your crews and your trucks should basically be interchangeable. You should be able to pull 2 guys off of this crew and put them on this crew in a different truck. And, you know, they'll have some, I guess, some reorienting to do around maybe, you know, which bin is which, but, you know, it should be the same material on each truck. It should not be a surprise that, you know, hey, our truck's in the shop, we're using this other one and we don't have conduit, or I don't know, you know, there's not fittings here, or it should be a predictable experience, in my opinion.
And clear labeling and organization, like, not all, you know, if you organize every truck the same, but also have everything clearly labeled. You see new installers come on the job all the time looking for something, and if a truck isn't clearly organized and labeled, guys will lose hours on the job trying to find the one part they need sometimes, and
Yeah.
it's pretty miserable to watch.
And it's completely preventable, as you said. Yep. So we talked a little bit about, you know, right material. Danny, what are the software and tools that installers and crews need to take with them to the job every day?
Right, and with Enphase, you know, make sure that you're jumping over to the new 3.0 platform. There's really just a couple details it's you know, when you go out to a site and you're on a cellular data network, it can be a real bummer to just wait for things to download, especially after you've gotten everything installed and you're ready to get it commissioned and running. So, you know, that simply on your whatever your phone platform is, just make sure you've got the latest app installed and up to date. And with Enphase, there's actually additional software. Sometimes you hear it called e-software or firmware within the app, and you want to make sure that that's up to date as well. That's kind of an internal item. So if you launch your app in the morning, hit update while you still have Wi-Fi or other thing, it'll just potentially save you, you know, 20 minutes and even an hour sometimes while that stuff downloads to your phone before it even gets pushed into the Envoy and other equipment. So these 2 steps are really important. We just think that really helps set you up for success.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the last thing anybody, you know, we talked a little bit while we were waiting for this webinar to kick off that, you know, it's the dog days of summer, and those of you guys that are out there training, you know, the last thing you want to do on a hot day is, you know, sit there in the garage or on the side of the house waiting for the firmware, holding everybody up from, you know, happy hour.
Could just imagine just sitting there with 4 people staring at a phone.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so the on-site work, where the rubber meets the road here. I broke this down into 2 buckets here, kind of, pre-work. So, before anybody gets up on the roof, before you start bending conduit, it's a little bit of the tedium here, but, what are the processes before you get started that help you be more effective, wherever you're working? And it's one of those proverbial, the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Pre-work huddle. So, this sounds really obvious again, but you get your team together, you review the plan set, you've done a cursory kind of inspection of the site, and you come up with a plan on, what steps you're going to tackle in which order, who's doing what. If there's any variances from the plan set to what you see in front of you, you guys need to determine if that's, if you've got a plan for that, or if you need to kind of, call back to base and figure out how to move forward. Making sure you've got an install checklist, that what the criteria are to say, yeah, we're done, this is a quality job, and we're ready to roll. And then finally, roles and responsibilities. I think that's important, whatever kind of work you're doing, but basically calling the ball and saying, you 2 guys, you're doing this, I'm down here, I'm doing that, and someone's doing module prep, for instance. And again, I think these are the things that good crews do as second nature. But reducing the variability from the good crew to the bad crew is something that will raise the bar across the board. And operating with predictability and routine, while a little tedious, helps everybody have a better day.
And Josh, what I've seen with some different companies, they do something kind of neat. Is they'll at the morning huddle there, they might actually kind of call out some specific goals. They're going to say, hey, by 10 o'clock, we want to have all the racking in before we have our first break. And I've even seen companies have challenges like, hey, let's see today if we can get X done by 11 o'clock. And it's really neat how it motivates people, and that specificity seems to really work well in my experience.
Yeah, that's a great call out. I like that. I like that a lot. So the install processes. So, I want to make sure we call out that this is not an install training webinar. And we don't pretend to be able to cover all of these in detail. But I think as we work through, what leads to good commissioning, just kind of laying out the major steps here. For each one of these, ask how you can reduce variability, make things more predictable and consistent, and increase the likelihood of a good commissioning outcome. So I'll just kind of run through these, and for most of these, we're going to have some best practices coming up. But the planning step, the pre-work huddle, looking at your plan set, ideally back at the warehouse, and thinking through your stringing and your circuits. This speaks to the guys who are working with kitted material, or who have I've seen this done on like a cart where the warehouse crew puts all of the material needed for that job. If you take a look at your plan set and you look at the array and you figure out, roughly speaking, how you're going to string that array, where you're going to combine, where you're going to put your junction boxes, for end phase, Danny, how your strings of 13 or 16 are going to be laid out, where you're going to have to combine in parallel. That will tell you if you've got enough junction boxes. If potentially, do you need a second combiner, because you're not going to be able to run 4 strings of 16. You're going to have 5 of 12, and that math doesn't work, so don't check me on that.
Right.
But ideally, you've done this before you've left the warehouse. At a minimum, you got to do it before people start getting up on the roof. Have a plan on how you're going to get all of those modules stringed and paralleled.
Yeah, and it might save you some time on using raw cable or making your own connections. Anything like that's really helpful.
And to go back to, I wanted to allude to this on Andrew's slide there, that horrifying install picture. If if you do a good plan on how you're going to string the array, you can avoid a ton of conduit. You know, conduit's not pleasant to work with in most instances, especially up on the roof. And if you can keep things tidy, you know, that helps increase the, you know, the feel good factor around aesthetics as well. MLPE and module prep. So, you know, one of you guys had this adage as we were putting these slides together that, you know, the least effective or the least efficient time is time up on the roof. So everything you can do on the ground to prep modules, MLPE, racking even, and we'll talk through some of that. The more of that you can do on the ground, the quicker you're going to be up on the roof.
What we like to say, Josh, is time on the ground is cheaper than time on the roof, and time in the warehouse is cheaper than time on the ground. So the more you can do earlier, whether it's prepping modules or prepping racking, and also another big thing is from a safety perspective. More accidents, more injuries, more heat stroke, everything, more of that happens on the roof than on the ground and then on the warehouse. So whatever work you can take off of the roof is beneficial to your business and to the health and safety of installers.
Yeah, and I don't know about you guys, but I like to work in the shade if I can too. It's nice to do cable management, etc., while I'm down in the garage or to the side of the house.
Yeah, I agree with you there. There's just not enough shade on the roof. Not to my liking.
Probably a good thing.
Probably a good thing given our industry. Yeah. So we'll talk through racking and some you know, some tips and best practices on racking, cable management, junction boxes, and conduit. Then, you know, assuming you've done all of that well, you're going to start laying glass. So don't have a lot of great tricks there. I think as an industry, we've gotten that pretty streamlined. We will talk about making a microinverter or an MLPE map and how critical that can be. And then finally, we'll talk through some wire management and some, you know, what I would call finish electrical work. This is really where the inverter commissioning picks up and takes over. So this is going to be the meat and potatoes of our presentation today. So let's just go ahead and dig in. We're going to jump ahead here a few steps into MLPE and module prep.
So yeah, one of the big things, as we just talked about, is doing any sort of this prep work on the ground. So in this case, this is something you could do with a rail or railless system, but right here is the typical install process for railless systems. Using smart clips and MLPE frame attachments, you're essentially attaching everything to the module frame, the microinverter or optimizer if you're doing that sort of system, and then clipping the cables into the module frame. So you're essentially using that module frame as its own wire management channel, and you can manage your leads, as you can see in this photo, to be at each end of the module as you're planning out your array. So then once you get up on the roof, you're just plugging in left and right. I think we have another slide on more of the rail type system, so I can talk about that later, but it's so important to have this ready. That way it makes the modules plug and play once you get to the roof and you're laying them down next to each other.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing, Andrew, is the cable at the end only has like an inch or two of slack. So it's just ready to snap into the next one, and that's it. That's great.
Yeah, no, you don't have anything hanging down below, as we saw how nasty that can get earlier.
Right.
And this is the, you know, in my experience, this is the work that you assign to the new guy on the crew, right? Of getting all of this prepped while maybe your more experienced guys are, you know, chalking and getting mounts laid out.
Yeah, you don't want the new guy finding the rafters. You want the guy that actually knows how the hammer should sound up there on the roof.
He won't find him, will he?
Nope.
Yeah. Speaking of rafters.
Yeah, definitely one of the most important things. We talk about good commissioning and service calls and everything. The worst type of service call isn't having the system go down. The worst kind is a roof leak. And that's why it's so important to rafter mounting, or a little teaser for everyone on the call. Snap and Rack's actually going to be launching a new deck mount system within the next couple months. So keep your eyes out for that. then you really can avoid missing rafters. But it's really important to locate rafters immediately on the job. And a best practice is to actually snap a string line along that rafter so you can follow it down, so you're not having to hammer out every single row of attachments. But what we're showing here is our speed seal technology, which actually helps prevent roof leaks by removing the need to pry up shingles and tear apart an existing composition roof, because it actually uses a chemical seal using ChemLink M1, and it's pressure driven by the lag. So you locate the rafter, you drill your pilot hole, you fill up this cavity on the bottom, and then once you lag it to the roof, it creates a super tight chemical seal of sealant, because let's be honest, throughout history, sealant's how we've been sealing holes forever, but this is just actually utilizing it the way it should. And it's, in fact, I think these images are from my own roof, and it's held up for quite a long time, but we've done testing on this through Intertech and UL with bucket testing, and this stuff sitting underwater through freezing temperatures, and it's an incredible technology that will help actually prevent disrupting the roof the way it was meant to be installed, and prevent your roof leaks, which is one of the things that's very important with commissioning and customer satisfaction.
This is wild. So you don't have to pry up anything or slide it under the shingles at all anymore. Is that accurate?
Correct. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm shedding tears. I'm sad I didn't get to use this years ago.
And yeah, there's the side benefit of it also, improving install efficiency and helping guys move faster on the roof, so you can get more jobs done in a day.
Right.
So two comments for you, Andrew, on this slide here. One is for the audience, M1 or whatever sealant you're using. We like ChemLink M1 here, but whatever you're using, make sure it's a good quality product. That should obviously be in your truck stock program. You make sure you have extra. It's cheap insurance. Don't rely on like, hey, I just opened this one yesterday, I should have plenty. Just some food for thought there for you guys. And then for you, Andrew, specifically on some follow-up, would love to see this slide with maybe a guy in a Giants hat instead of a Dodgers hat. But
I'm on the same page, lifetime Giants fan, but sadly, one of our best guys right there, George, one of our field trainers, something's wrong in his head and he roots for the Dodgers. So.
Yeah, he lives near me, so it makes sense down here in SoCal, right?
We'll let that slide, I suppose. Yeah. Talk us through wire management and what are some easy things installers can do to keep things trained and out of the way.
Yeah, so we talked about wire management on a railless system. Wire management on rails is much more straightforward, and we'll get into kind of the difference on the mapping, but one of the benefits with it on a rail-based system, especially using something like M-Phase, is you can put in your microinverter and run all your cables in the rail channel, snapping in those wire retention clips, snapping in your junction box. You can do all of your wire management prior to laying down your modules. So then once you lay down your modules on the roof, you're just plugging them straight into your trunk cable and your microinverter. And we'll get to how that benefits with mapping, but we've got universal wire clamps that you can snap on before, so it's easy to transfer from rail to rail. Really one of the major benefits of rails is you've got that channel, not only to manage and add your accessories on and map out your whole system before you bring the modules up, but to actually run your trunk cable and cables throughout the system and do all your wiring before you're laying those modules down.
So Andrew, practically speaking, would the rough process be, that the roof team's gonna, take measurements and call out to the guy on the ground where to put the splices and roughly how long the rail should be and where things should go? The thing is though, a lot of times you can just put the splices actually just go on like a hot dog bun, so you can do that up on the roof. If it's a simple array, you'll actually see best practice where they'll attach everything on the ground so they don't have to attach as much on the roof. So they'll just be putting down their L feet and then they can just snap in the rail with everything pre-attached once it's on the roof. If you have something a little bit more complex, it's probably best to put the rail on the roof. If you have to have any splices, put on the next piece, cut off the end with a Sawzall, and then add everything up there. But
most arrays are pretty simple, and you can do a lot of this work on the ground. So the benefit is obviously with Ultra Rail having that snap-in mounting bracket, you just come up on the roof and it just all pops into place, and you're ready to go.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff.
I think Danny's used that system a few times in the past.
Yeah, it's on my roof. I really like it. Not the Ultra Rail, the older one, but I'm jealous that wasn't out yet.
Yeah. So this kind of shows proper wire management compared to, as you saw before, with those zip ties, holding on to, you know, a thinner rail that doesn't have a channel. Here you can see how clean and beneficial it is to have your PV wires or your cables come straight from the module straight into that rail channel, run along it, and then utilizing wire clamps to run your way both into conduit or throughout the rest of the rail channel to the rest of your modules and the rest of your system.
Mm-hmm.
So not having things hang down. You know, I mentioned composition shingle being essentially sandpaper before and not wanting wires hanging down in it. You can see this, there's a flat tile here on the bottom right, and it's more of like maybe a grinding wheel or something.
Rough concrete, all right, yeah.
Not what you want cables hanging and rubbing against.
Yeah. And I think we were a little remiss here, Andrew. We probably could have called out the new lineup of newish lineup of conduit mounts, and we've now got, you know, 3/4 inch, 1 inch PVC and EMT mounts that you know, help any installer do a better job securing conduit on the roof.
And they're also flashingless and don't require prying up shingles anymore. You know, this is older technology showing our umbrella ceiling flashing technology, but as you saw with Speed Seal, you're not going to have to pry up and get under those shingles anymore.
Yep, good stuff. So, you know, this kind of takes us to the point in the process where, you know, we've done the racking, we've done wire management. We may even be at the point where we've started to lay some glass. At this point, you know, it's going to be more of the electrical work, and specifically, you know, the next step here we'll talk through is something as silly or as obvious as an MLP module map. How critical that can be to operations down the road.
Right, and I guess just to kind of back up with a little specifics. So if it's a rail-based system, you'd have all your microinverters installed, cabled in, and then that's typically where people will walk along with a clipboard and pull off the serial numbers off the microinverters and stick them on their map that they're making. If it was rail free, kind of a cool tip is as you're mounting the microinverters to your rails down on the ground, you pull off that serial number sticker and actually just put it right on top of the solar panel. So that way later on, after the panel's mounted, you can kind of just walk along and pull that sticker off easily without having to reach under. So in this case, what I wanted to show here is kind of a funny, well, funny to me, I guess, mistake, because I wasn't the one who had to go back and correct it. You can see that at this site, we had a customer that was kind of concerned about their power output on this system and some weird things happening. And if you look really carefully, you can see these three solar panel and microinverter pairs out to the right that aren't performing, yet three of them kind of in the mid left area are. Well, it turns out if you look at that inset photo down below, you can see there are some in the sun, some that are covered in snow. This was simply due to the installers making kind of a good mistake there when they made their map, or just not getting it right at all. So we definitely want to avoid that for future service and analysis.
Yeah, that would make it really hard to troubleshoot.
Yeah. And so on the next image there, so the truth is, we at different companies, it's kind of funny seeing how their strict policies are on, or no policy whatsoever on making these maps. I fully have to just admit to people that as long as it's something you could clearly understand, you're gonna be okay. I mean, it's Enphase has these little kind of basic guides that's like a grid sheet you can use. You can grab your pizza box, put it on there, just make it very logical and clear. One of the best things I've even seen is some companies, when they print out the plan set itself, they'll actually put the serial numbers right on that those little stickers, and it makes it a lot easier. A quick thing that we have seen here and there, different companies will sometimes have like specialists that come by and do one step and take off, and they'll bring the map with them. We find that that can slow down commissioning. So we really want you to do, even if you do take digital pictures of these maps and things, which is a good idea, try to make sure that you have the physical map with stickers on the site at commissioning. It's just a lot easier when you're using that installer toolkit to actually scan the numbers than it is to kind of zoom in and out of a digital photo. So that's just a nice tip.
Yeah, and Danny, you mentioned earlier, and I can't reiterate this enough, having a clipboard, because up there on the roof, the wind can easily take a piece of paper or a piece of cardboard away. Cardboard's probably a little better than paper, but I've seen so many times the just piece of paper fly off the roof, and that's never going to make commissioning fun. So definitely having something heavy and sturdy, such as a clipboard, is a major pro tip there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So Danny, we joked about this when we were putting these slides together, using a pizza box. And I think the comment I had made was there's a lot to like about this. They've got their cardinal orientations here. They've labeled the roof gables. They've stickered. I would imagine if we were to go find this roof, they would actually be in portrait orientation,
right,
except for those 3 that are in landscape. And they've also got the Envoy serial number there. So yeah, there's a lot to like, and I hope they enjoyed their pizza too.
Right. And yeah, this would work. Maybe not the most pleasing, but definitely useful. Well, so we talked about kind of different ways that crews operate, different issues on sites. For example, the site where there was a sticker issue or other item earlier that caused it to not pass inspection or delayed the PTO. So I wanted to kind of mention one of the neat features within the Enphase system is it's actually really easy to put the system into what we call a standby mode. And you can do this from the job site. You pull up the system, you tap the Envoy hardware, and you tap on power production disable. It's that, so that what that does is you've left all of the switches on. 100% of all of your circuits are energized and active. And then you tap that disable button here, and what that does is that allows you remotely from a computer or even other devices, you can then pull up that system with Enlighten Manager and actually turn it back on without having to drive back to the site. So I wanted to kind of make sure that everybody knew how to do this. And specifically within the Enphase ecosystem, you're going to basically find the Envoy, you're going to disable power production, and then once PTO has been granted, the letter, the email, etc., you'll go back to that exact same spot and you'll tap enable power production. So it can really save people a lot of time and stress and money.
Yeah, I like that. And from the homeowner perspective, you're not waiting on a truck roll. You're not waiting for a guy to be free to come over. Yeah, lots of like that.
Yeah, it's nice. And there's quite a few homeowners that don't like to turn on and off switches too. So if you're allowed to use this feature, it's great.
Yeah. One other thing that we talked about when we put these together were the, kind of quirks or challenges that you see installers encounter at commissioning with Enphase. And a number of them are related to kind of the wiring of production and consumption CTs. Can you walk us through some of that?
Oh, right. So one of the most common callbacks or avoidable service calls is just mistakes related to the metering and energy measurement hardware. So shown here is the IQ combiner. Almost all residential systems have them, just maybe a few of the very large ones don't, but that system, it's got, in this case, a printed circuit board Envoy and a production CT. And if used, the consumption CTs would be installed elsewhere. So do me a favor, jump to the next slide. And what I wanted to show here is kind of the principles of how to get it right. So the good news is the production CT, because it's pre-installed, there's not a lot you need to do. However, the same concepts apply if you have a separate Envoy that you put in your own sub panel with its own production CT. Now that production CT is what measures the solar system output to what we consider revenue grade accuracy. And it's a real nice feature, and it's required in some areas depending on your situation. But essentially, you're going to have all of the line 1 conductors from your PV system pass through it. You don't need to put the line 2 or anything like that. And they need to be passing through it in a fashion that CT, the arrow of it, points away from solar and towards the loads, towards the grid. If you did it the other way, it would kind of look like your solar system was consuming energy, which obviously doesn't make sense. And then the CT wiring itself, for this one being a production CT, you just need to make sure you land those on the correct terminals, P1 shown here. Now the next item is the consumption CTs. That's a little bit more to it. And so if you're trying to accurately capture or monitor and measure all of your energy consumption at your site, you need to make sure that they're located where all power from the site flows through them. And there's sort of this nuance. And what's a funny thing is that a lot of electricians and myself and everyone included, we don't really think about, well, line 1, line 2, which one is it? Does it really matter? With monitoring, it does. So the Envoy, when we measure line 1, we're looking for the power flowing through line 1, meaning the voltage and current of line 1. If we're looking for line 2, we want the voltage and current of line 2. They're not interchangeable. So there's kind of some technical reasons for that. But anyway, the takeaway is that whatever you have wired to the Envoy as line 1, the CT1 has to be on that same common electrical path, right? And same with CT2. So simply put, your consumption CT1 needs to land on line 1, CT2 on line 2. A way you can figure that out is you could put your meter on like the continuity mode if you want. I think that's actually not the best way. A better way is to measure voltage, right? You'd have 0 volts if you're on the same one. If you're got 240 volts, that means you're on different lines. So it's kind of a cool trick. And anyway, similar to the production CT, you want to measure the power in the kind of in the direction it's typically flowing, at least for this application. So your consumption CT needs to point towards the loads and away from the grid. And finally, the last step is just make sure you land those CT wires on the correct terminal. So CT1, terminal 1, CT2, terminal 2. And you'll notice there's a real basic but super helpful step here that is shown is if you take a piece of colored tape, right? Because your CTs, when they come out of the packaging, they're identical, right? There's no marking of which CT is which once you've pulled all this wires through the conduit. So if you take one of your CTs and mark it up, let's say with red colored tape, that way you'll know which CT is which on both sides of the conduit. So it's just a cool way to help reduce some confusion or mistakes. So that's by, excuse me. And these metering errors are by far the biggest avoidable mistakes we see with Enphase systems. And then we definitely, unfortunately, there's some return visits for this kind of thing. But if you follow these steps, you'll definitely reduce these errors.
Yeah, very helpful. And as we discussed, Danny, the consumption CTs are now included on the standard IQ combiners, whether you're dealing with the IQ combiner that comes packaged with the cell modem or not.
Right.
And as we discussed, the consumption monitoring is going to be probably the number one kind of fallback point for any discussions with the homeowner on whether the system is actually doing what it's supposed to.
Right, especially we hit summer months and they're like, my bill went up, and well, yeah, you could kind of show them, well, your power consumption tripled. So yeah, this is your way of giving people information about their energy consumption. And these are required, consumption CTs are required with energy storage systems. I think they're very nice to have with your standard PV systems as well.
Absolutely, and it it kind of leaves a trail of breadcrumbs to try to go back and upsell to a battery down the road, or with Enphase, it's pretty easy to sell additional PV or an add-on when their loads increase. Gives your sales team some ammo for those conversations.
Right.
Well, we are 4 minutes shy of the top of the hour. We'll open it up for some questions here. As Aaron goes through the kind of the chat and sees what questions there, just a couple call outs. If there's 3 things that we're going to leave you with today, the importance of an installation checklist, the importance of some kind of material program around truck stock or parachute bags, and really just kind of thinking through the different checkpoints in the installation process, making sure that they are in your training program, and that you've got the right kind of rigor around the gating items in those processes. So Aaron, have we got any good Q&A for us today?
Sorry, I was on mute. No, so far we do not have any questions, but to me that is indicative of an extremely informative presentation. But I will continue to kind of look here for the next minute or so. But I mean, in the interim, do Andrew or Danny or Josh, for that matter, you guys have any kind of closing commentary?
I would just like to say that that's the first time in over a year I've heard someone say, sorry, I was on mute. So
yeah, I've not heard that in a long time.
Oh, I'm glad that's kind of it. Yeah, it was new for me too. Yeah, it's very funny. Yeah, so I mean, I don't see any coming in, but with that said, anyone who is any of our attendees that are still on the call right now, if anything is to come up after we hang up here, I know personally I think of questions at 3 in the morning, so if anything comes up, feel free to shoot us an email after the fact. Josh has his contact info up here on the screen, and we're more than happy to answer anything that comes to mind. Be sure to fill out our quick little survey after we close this out here, and we'll be sure to send you a copy of this wonderful presentation. So I think we are pretty much good to go here, guys.
Aaron, I've got a quick plug. So my team with our training vans, we've just started to get back on the road. We kind of took a while to get back out in the public for obvious reasons. But yeah, you can actually start seeing the Enphase training vans. We've got one on the East Coast, one out here on the West Coast. I'm going to be out next week in different areas. So if anybody's interested in getting their hands on Enphase storage for live training events, we have that going. And there's actually it's free. There's the university.enphase.com. You can take like the online training as well. So I hope to see a lot of people out in the field soon.
How would people sign up for that, Danny?
Well, so we've got kind of a backlog here and there, and what we do, each training event itself, there's kind of different types. There's one we kind of call like the public engagement or the marketing one. That's where you can come up and just kind of check out the equipment. But in terms of what we call a full certification training, we try to limit it to 8 to 10 people, because you're actually going to wire it up, go through the full commissioning process. So that one, it's a small group, roughly eight-ish people typically, but we hold multiple sessions, per week, and it's real busy. So if you're there, you will be touching equipment. You'll actually be going through all the real important steps. And yeah, we think it's going to really help keep up the quality, get people their hands on time, and let them just see what the equipment's capable of. So
love to hear it. Awesome.
Yeah, that is an awesome opportunity. Thanks for calling that out. Sure. I think we are just at the top of the hour here, so I'm going to close this out. But thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for a fantastic presentation and discussion. And like I mentioned, if any questions do arise after the presentation is over, please feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to help out. So with that, happy Friday, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Thanks all.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. All right, bye-bye.